my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. This episode is in partnership with Motif Medical. Motif designs insurance-eligible products for busy moms. With a focus on innovation and empowerment, Motif's line of breast pumps and maternity compression garments are sophisticated yet discreet and made to support mothers as they navigate new motherhood. Discover why moms are reporting more milk in less time with the Luna breast pump and see how you can get it covered through insurance at motifmedical.com/birthhour. You'll also see their other products there like the Aura Glow, which is their new wearable pump that I discussed at the end of this episode with lactation consultant Jackie. We talk about what makes this wearable unique and how it compares to the Luna, and it's really just a great conversation, so be sure to listen to that at the end of this episode. Before we get to today's birth story, I want to talk a little bit about our online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options, and this is the course you've been looking for if you just have that gut feeling that you know you should be taking a childbirth course, but maybe the one that's being offered to you by your care provider is not exactly what you're looking for. It might be more catered towards the type of birth they want you to have versus making you informed of all your different options and how to address different things that happen in birth, because as this podcast has shown us, birth is very unpredictable. So we would love to have you check out our 12-module course. You can go to thebirthhour.com/course to see detailed outlines of what is included in the course. You will also get a bonus course called Beyond the First Latch that is an additional 6 modules all about pumping, feeding your baby, going back to paid work if that's part of your plan. And we have a special coupon code for you. It's 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Again, that's thebirthhour.com/course. Another way you can get involved with the Birth Hour community is by joining our Patreon. This is where you pledge your support of the Birth Hour at $5 a month or more, and you get perks in return, like access to all of our archived episodes. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of episodes. We've been putting out birth stories since 2015, and those are all available in our archives via Patreon. And you also get access to our private Facebook community, which is a really great group of people who are there to support you, become friends, and just encourage you on this journey through parenthood. So find out more about that at patreon.com/birthhour. Today's birth story guest is Margaret, and she has a home birth story to share in Canada with a transfer to the hospital during the pushing phase of labor. All right, let's hear from Margaret. Hi, Margaret. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yes, of course. I'm very excited to get to your story. But before we do that, can you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. So we live in Caslow, British Columbia, Canada, which is a small town in southwestern BC on the unceded lands of the Sinixt, Ktunaxa, Sayilk, and Secwepemc peoples. I grew up in this area, and my husband, Carl, is from the U.S. We met in Oregon in 2012 and moved up to Caslow in 2016 after he got his permanent residency. I work as a childcare provider, and I've also had the chance to do home support through the local community services office here for people with babies up to 1 year. I think that's one of the most awesome jobs. It's actually been discontinued since I was on my maternity leave. It lost its funding, but I just think it's such a valuable thing to be able to have somebody come into your home for a couple hours every week and do sort of whatever you need. So yeah, that was a really special job to me that I had before becoming pregnant.
Okay.
And Carl works as a garbage man here in Caslow.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and talk about finding out you're pregnant, how your pregnancy went, whatever you want to share.
Okay. So we decided to start trying to get pregnant in November of 2022. We'd been together for almost 10 years and had talked about having kids before, but it just seemed to be the right time. Like we had a conversation about it and we both, wanted to start a family. So we began trying, and we were very fortunate that it only took about 3 months. We got pregnant in February of 2023. I was using ovulation strips, which I totally recommend to people now. I didn't even really know they existed before, and I think I heard about them on this podcast, and they really worked. Like the first month that I was trying those, we got pregnant. I took a test, a pregnancy test on my mom's birthday, which is March 8th, and saw that it was positive. And so I shared the news with her on her birthday, which was a neat thing to get to do. And yeah, that was basically our journey to getting pregnant.
Okay. And how did your pregnancy go?
It was very smooth. I think, I had a lucky pregnancy. I didn't have much, sickness or anything, a little mild nausea, but nothing to talk about. And I quickly decided at the beginning of my pregnancy that I wanted to work with a midwife. I was born at home in a little community nearby. And I also got to attend a home birth when I was around 11 years old, doing childcare for the older kiddo in the family. And so that was kind of like a experience of birth throughout my life. And so I knew I wanted to have a home birth. And we live in a tiny town of about 1,000 people. And so there's one midwife that, works in Kaslo and does home births. And you can also work with midwives in the hospital, which is in a bigger community about an hour away. But if you want to have a home birth, that's the option. And so we felt really fortunate that she was so wonderful. When we met her, we really felt a good, connection with her. And so that was lucky since we didn't have options.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And then decided figuring out our plan for birth. My sister is the one who turned me on to your podcast. She's a self-described birth nerd, and she is in nursing school. And I asked her to be at our birth as part of our birth team. And she agreed, and also decided to take a doula course during my pregnancy so that she could, learn all the best ways to be supportive, which was really sweet of her and super helpful. During my pregnancy, I got to attend a program at the family center here in town called Growing with Baby, which is for pregnant people and those parenting babies up to 9 months. And that was a really wonderful opportunity. It's weekly. You have like a sharing circle, and then they provide lunch. And I feel like that was such a huge support throughout my pregnancy. Just being able to connect with other people who are going through the same experience was really special and valuable. And then I loved listening to the podcast as well.
Yeah, finding that community is so huge when you're, especially a first-time mom, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I went for pelvic floor physiotherapy, I think 3 times before my baby's birth and then twice after. And that was really great. I think that's such a wonderful thing to do during pregnancy. It really helped me kind of learn about my own anatomy, and then also just get some exercises to practice using muscles that, I never had focused on before. So that was something that I really recommend to everybody and thought was really helpful during my pregnancy. I also asked my other sister and my best friend to be at our birth. So that was sort of our team of 3 of my 2 sisters and friend, and then our midwife was going to be our birth team at home. What else was during pregnancy? We got to go on a couple of hikes while I was pregnant. I was really glad that my best friend, who also was at our birth, invited us to go on a 5-day hike, which was made possible by my husband and our 2 friends, carrying a lot of my stuff. And that was a really special experience to be able to get to do, carrying baby at about 5 months pregnant on a 5-day hike in the Rockies to Mount Assiniboine.
That's a good time. I think before that, maybe nauseous, after maybe too big, but that's kind of perfect.
It was lovely. Yeah. Then getting into the end of my pregnancy, baby was head down in kind of a position with their back up along my right side and legs kicking over towards the top of my left side for weeks. And so that was interesting. Looking back at it after having the birth, I wonder if, as everything went, having the baby in that position so solidly for such a long time, I feel like I may have tried to do some, spinning babies or mild circuit, different things to get them to move around a bit, because I think he ended up a little bit stuck in that position, as you'll see further on in the story. But it was interesting to notice just for a long time during the end of my pregnancy, all the kicks in one spot. And I could definitely feel his head down, tucked right in there, and
got super comfy there.
He did. Yeah, he definitely did. I ended up going late. And so I somehow expected that I would be late. I was a week late being born. My husband was late. I don't know if that has anything to do with whether your baby's going to be late in reality, but I kind of expected that it would be. And I felt good up to the end of my pregnancy, which ended up going to 41 weeks, 5 days. But it's interesting once you pass your due date just to note all the kind of external pressure and the way that changes is interesting. Like if somebody hears you're past your due date, it's an interesting experience anyway.
Yeah, there's always the people that just assume you'll be induced by a certain time and things like that.
Yeah, I was glad to have a midwife who supported us to go, beyond 40 weeks. I was thankful for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you want to go ahead and talk about how labor started?
Yeah. So at 41 weeks, on the day I went in for a non-stress test, and my midwife asked if she could perform a cervical sweep, which I consented to. And she was able to do, I was 1 centimeter dilated. And then again at 41 weeks and 3 days, we went in for another non-stress test, which was at the hospital about an hour away from where we live. And the same thing, everything looked good. And my midwife asked if she could do a cervical sweep. And so I had the second cervical sweep, which I've heard some people say is really very painful. And for me, it was not so bad. I just tried to really relax and I didn't find it to be too bad. So if anybody's looking forward to that, it's not terrible for everyone, at least. And then after that second cervical sweep, that night, I started to have very mild contractions overnight. It wasn't enough where I was being kept awake by them. But when I would kind of be in between sleep states, I would notice some mild contractions. And then also throughout the next day, when I was 41 and 4, I had some mild contractions in the morning. They were about 20 minutes apart and just sort of progressing to be a little bit more intense and a little closer together slowly throughout that day. I went on several walks with my husband and our 2 dogs. He was off work at that point. In Canada, we're super lucky to get a year of parental leave, which you can split up. There's 5 weeks that are just for the birthing parent, but then you can split it up between parents if you want to. So he had 6 weeks, which had started at the beginning of my 41st week of pregnancy. And so he had been off work and we were hanging around our home, had a nap, went for a couple of long walks. That afternoon, we were walking with our dogs and saw an owl flying, which was it's not often something we often see. That was a neat little symbol to me. I don't know. I liked to see that. And then we got back home after that walk and my contractions were then about 7 minutes apart. My husband had been kind of timing them on the walk. I'd stop and lean against a tree or something. And so he was timing them and he said they were about 7 minutes apart. So we called our birth team to let them know, things were moving along. So my 2 sisters and my friend got ready to come up and joined us at our house. And labor just kind of slowly continued to progress. I was kind of kneeling over a birth ball for contractions for quite a while and getting counter pressure from my husband or my sisters. And around 10 p.m. that night, my contractions got to the place where they were about lasting about almost a minute and about 5 minutes apart. So then my husband called our midwife. I'd texted her early in the day just to let her know what was up, but he called her to let her know that things were moving along. And so she said she'd start to get ready and come up to our house. At 10:45-ish, my water broke. It was a really neat experience. My sister, Robin, was in our bedroom with me and giving me counter pressure during a contraction. We both heard this very clear, audible pop. And I felt a little gush of water. And then, that it was interesting. It wasn't a huge explosion. It was just kind of this little pop sound that we both heard. And I was oh, is that my water? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel you don't expect it to be audible usually, but it seems to happen all different ways for people.
Definitely. So at about 1 a.m. that night, our midwife, Lisa, arrived. Carl had been setting up, we had a birth tub that we borrowed and had a cover for, and he had been setting that up and a little floor bed in the living room. So that was all ready. Lisa arrived and checked the fetal heart tones and my blood pressure and everything looked good. And I just continued laboring through the night. Everything kind of was going, progressing, contractions getting a little bit closer and longer and increasing in intensity, just very kind of slowly throughout the night. I was laboring, lots over the birth ball. And then finally at 3 a.m. I got into the birth tub and that was wonderful. I really enjoyed laboring in the water. It was super relaxing for me. And I think everybody else took a little bit of time to rest and relax as well. I felt like really well supported by the team that was there. Always somebody there to give counter pressure, and they were giving me sips of water through my, water bottle and trying to give me different little things of food if I would accept it, like fruit and different things. And so everybody had a little bit of a chance to relax, I think, when I got into the tub. I stayed in, I think, for about an hour and a half. And then our midwife asked me to get out and labor upright for a little while. I had one leg supported on a stool to see if that would help things keep progressing. And I was holding my arms around Carl's neck and kind of like hanging from him, trying some different positions. Then got back in the tub a little bit later in the morning, around 4:30. And Lisa asked if she could do a cervical check, and I was around 4 to 5 centimeters. All during this night part, I feel like I was really in kind of labor land, and I feel like I had my eyes closed all the time, and I wasn't very aware. I just was feeling this feeling of being cared for, and everything was going internal. I wasn't focused externally at all, and I was able to do that from everyone around me supporting me, which was really wonderful feeling. I then, around 6-ish in the morning, got out of the birth tub and went to have, my midwife suggested just go lay down and try to have some rest between contractions in our bed. And so I did that. I was super surprised to see, like when I briefly opened my eyes at one point, morning coming. I had no idea of the passage of time. And when I saw dawn was coming, I was very surprised that that much time had passed. It felt like, if I'd guessed at that point, I think I would have said like maybe an hour or two had passed. It was already morning. Our midwife then came in and did another cervical check around 8 a.m. And I was dilated to 5 centimeters. So things were progressing, but very slowly. So she suggested getting up and doing some upright positioning and then reassessing in a couple of hours. I think at this point, she had a sense of how slow things were going, and she was maybe a little bit concerned about that. But for me, I didn't have a sense of that at all. I was fully engrossed in labor, and it didn't seem like it was going too slowly or anything like that to me. I was just in it. Yeah, I got upright and did some different positions upright with Carl supporting me. And I like walking with my leg up on like the little floor bed that we had in the living room, like 1 foot up, 1 foot down. And then around 9:45, 10 a.m., I was dilated to 6 centimeters. And our midwife sort of had a little talk with us saying, how are you feeling? Do you want to go into the hospital to get some extra support and get some rest and that, or do you feel strong to keep laboring at home? That was the first point where I think I sort of realized that she thought anything was, going not as quickly as she would have expected. And I absolutely wanted to stay at home. I felt very attached to the idea of having my baby at home, and it's what I'd been preparing for. So I said, yeah, I'm feeling strong. I feel good. I want to stay home. And so she said, okay, we'll do that and we'll check in again in a couple of hours. And so then she had me doing some more different positions. I was doing inversions off the edge of our couch. So I had my knees up on the couch and my elbows like resting down on the floor, which seemed like an absolutely impossible position to me to get into with my like gigantic pregnant belly and going through contractions. But with support, I managed it, and somebody would be holding my elbows so they didn't slide away, and somebody was holding like my back to help me kind of balance up there. And I did several contractions in that position, 3 or 4 contractions, I think. And then would get out of that position and stand up for a while and then back into it. And then we went outside. Lisa said, you could try walking around the yard, and Carl can support you. So I got my a robe on. I was, totally naked at that point. I'd been in and out of the birth tub and got my robe on and some boots and walked around the yard. It's winter here, so it was fairly cold, but actually we hadn't had much snow at that point. So the yard was pretty clear for walking around, and it was, a beautiful sunny morning, and we walked around the yard, and I would just hang on Carl as I went through contractions and then do some walking around. I went back inside and tried another positioning where I laid kind of on my side at the very bottom edge of our bed and hung my top leg down over the edge of the bed. So it was hanging down as low as it would if I relaxed, and did that on both sides through several contractions. And then after that, Lisa checked me, in the bed. And so then I was dilated to 8 centimeters. So that was around noon of the 25th of November. And so it was 41 weeks and 5 days at that point. And so that was, I felt like we had made some good progress in those past 2 hours, dilating from 6 to 8 centimeters. And they were warming up the birth tub again. And so then I got back in the tub, and I was having, pretty close together, strong contractions at that point. And I was using some almost not moaning, exactly, more kind of chanting sounds. And I don't know where the idea, it wasn't an idea, where they came from, but I was thinking at the time, I can't get through the contractions without making the sound because it was vibrating my lower back, which I was, having back labor. And I felt like I couldn't get through the contraction without vibrating, having that vibration going in my back was so helpful. So I was making these long, low sounds through each contraction. And then at about 2:30 in the afternoon, I'd been in and out of the tub, like to pee and stuff, but mostly laboring in the tub. And I started to feel a lot of pressure, like down low, kind of in my low back, but also, just a lot of pressure. And so Lisa asked if she could do a check, and I was almost fully dilated with a small cervical lip. So then Lisa asked if she could try to move the cervical lip on a contraction. And so she did that, and it was successful. That was around 3:30 p.m. I was fully dilated. And so I got to start pushing with every contraction, which was a relief. I didn't experience like that fetal ejection reflex where you have like a big urge to push. But once I started pushing with each contraction, it felt good. Like I liked the feeling of, it felt like I had sort of a specific task to do, and it felt great to like really be working on getting this baby out. So after about 40-ish minutes of laboring in the tub, our midwife asked for me to get out again and be upright. I tried doing a squatting position. I had like my back against Carl. He was sitting on a chair and I had my back against him. I was squatting down and doing some pushes that way. And then Lisa suggested trying to keep my sound in and just using all of that energy to push baby down. So we tried that for a while. I tried laying on my back on the floor bed that we had set up in the living room and like curling around, kind of curling up and around, and being supported by many hands to do that and doing pushes that way. And then I tried like leaning over the edge of the couch with my arms kind of supported on the couch, pushing that way. They could then see baby's hair. I was back on my back, and Lisa was, showing that the baby's hair, and I was able to reach down and feel baby's hair. So we had made it pretty close. And then my contractions started to space out and become much less intense. It was almost like frustrating because I was like, I was doing it, and then it just wasn't this strong contraction anymore. It was like I was still having them, but it was slowing down to about 2 in 10, and not feeling the same like strong wave, just sort of shorter and milder. And at that point, our midwife Lisa and her second assistant, who had come like once I was fully dilated here in Canada, the midwives who do home births have a requirement to have a second assistant. So that can be a nurse who has special training or another midwife who comes for the birth part, so that there's a medical professional to support both mom and baby at home. And so her second assistant, who was also, funnily enough, named Lisa, was there as well. And they both kind of conferred together and then came to say, hey, like, we think that we need to go into the hospital to get some more different support. And so I was heartbroken. I was very sad about that. The idea of transferring into the hospital. I had prepared, I had a hospital bag, and I knew that was a possibility with a home birth, but I wasn't prepared for it. I still, even though I was exhausted, and they thought, that's why your contractions are slowing down, because your body is just so exhausted. But I was not ready for that change.
Yeah, and very unexpected when you can already see baby's hair.
Yeah, exactly. It had been quite, I'd been pushing for about 2 hours at that point, and it made progress, but it was so slow. And I think Lisa had also I think she thought that baby was positioned sideways. She had tried to reach in and feel a little bit to see where baby's face was, and she had an inkling that that's what was going on. Yeah, it's tricky because, in hindsight, I totally wonder what would have happened if I had said, like, no. It's hard to say how much of the decision is mine versus theirs. I mean, I know it's technically mine, but it didn't feel that way at the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then the ambulance arrived, and Carl and our midwife, Lisa, were able to ride in the ambulance with me, which was great. My one older sister decided to go home. She has her own kids here in Kaslo, so she headed home after being with us for almost 24 hours. And then my other sister and my friend, one of them drove our car and one of them drove our midwife Lisa's car into Nelson so that we would have our vehicles there and met us at the hospital. The ambulance ride was horrible. We live in the mountains, very windy roads, and I was strapped down to this, to the bed in the back, and they kind of tried to like elevate my back a bit, but it was just a very uncomfortable position and I wasn't able to move around. And although my contractions had slowed down and were, less intense, it was still very uncomfortable. We also had an ambulance attendant who was not the kind of person you want to meet when you're, have a baby who, is just about to come out. He was just full of like talking about his own life and, really pulling me right out of what I was, trying to do, having a baby.
Yeah, probably not used to like laboring women who are like in that headspace where they don't want to be distracted by random chatter, which is maybe what someone who just got in a car accident wants or something.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, Carl also got sick in the back of the ambulance, and I mean, poor guy.
Oh, no.
Of course, he's sick and he's throwing up and stuff. And at the time, I just was like, "Oh, why are you getting sick? Like, this is not about you."
Yeah. But pull it together, man.
Exactly.
Oh, he was probably just worried about you.
Oh my God, he does get car sick. So anyway, that was quite an adventure getting to the hospital. And then once we arrived, it was kind of a whirlwind of just, seeing a bunch of different medical professionals who kind of went through all of the same, paperwork and questions. Like I felt like 3 times over, I had to answer all of the same questions. A doctor came in and saw me and asked if she could, do a check of the baby, and said that she thought he was occiput transverse, so his face facing towards the side of my body. And so she offered to try to manually turn him and then attempt a forceps delivery. What she was comfortable with was for me to have an epidural and like I guess there's like different levels of the amount of the medication they can give you in an epidural. And she wanted me to have it be very strong so that in case I needed to have an emergency C-section. So this would all take place in the OR. And so I consented to that. Again, this is one of those moments I look back on afterwards and think, what if I had just said, no, I'd like to wait and see what happens for a little while. I'm here at the hospital, but I'm going to just, take some time to wait and see what happens, and then go from there. At this point, all of baby's heart tone checks had been coming back good, but also I was aware that our midwife Lisa had been with us for about 20 hours at that point, and I think the limit is 24 hours that they can be with you. And so there was that pressure, and also I was not in a place where I could make that call. I don't think I was. So I consented to the epidural, manual rotation, and then forceps assistance, and with the potential backup of a cesarean. And so we got all prepped and transferred to the OR. Carl could not come into the OR until after I had the epidural. I don't exactly understand why, but my midwife Lisa could come in with me for that part. So we transferred over to the OR, and I got the epidural. The anesthesiologist was a very annoying to me at that point person. He had a little Bluetooth speakers playing music on, and just to give an example of the kind of like chatter that he was giving afterwards, after everything was done, and he was taking for the epidural, they put a whole bunch of tape over your back to keep it in place because it has to be very kept in one position. And so it's like this medical tape that's like over a whole bunch of your back. After the birth, when he was coming in to remove the epidural, before he peeled off all that tape, he said, "Free back wax," and ripped it off. So anyway, that was kind of his personality and his mode of operation, which was totally grating to me at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I got the epidural, and it was wild. Because it was also quite strong, I could feel nothing at all from my chest down at that point. I couldn't tell when I was having contractions anymore at all. I didn't have any feeling of pressure or nothing. And so that was very strange to go from just like having worked with the contractions for such a long time and getting to such a rhythm, and then, not being able to feel it at all anymore was very strange. The Dr. McLaren, came in and did the manual rotation, which was successful. And actually, she said that by the time I got into it had already changed some from the time she had checked me in the room to being in the OR. He had already turned a little bit, and she was able to turn him more. And so then she recommended that I try pushing through a few contractions. They hooked me up to oxytocin to get the contractions going more strongly again. They started out at a level 2 and then just kept ramping it up it felt like every half a minute she was saying, "Okay, turn it up, until it was up to, I think, 12. I don't really know exactly what that means about how much medication it is or how high and low the levels go, but they got it ramped up until they were, seeing contractions. They were watching on a monitor to tell when the contractions were happening. So I had this little monitor hooked onto my belly. And so they would tell me when I was having a contraction so that I could push. So I was really grateful that I'd had the chance to push with feeling the contraction. So at least I knew, even though I couldn't feel anything anymore, I knew kind of how to move my body and what to tense in order to push. It was a very weird experience, but I managed to push baby down to a +2 station. He had been at a 0 to +1 station when we arrived, the doctor had said. And so able to push him down to a +2 station, and then she decided that forceps would be a good option, and so she applied the forceps. And that was the other thing. She had me consent to an episiotomy beforehand if she felt it was necessary, because she said with a forceps delivery, the risk of tearing badly is much greater. And when she had talked about the episiotomy in the room before we'd come into the operating room, my husband Carl had said, why would you want to do that? And, because tears heal better. And, we had done the Know Your Options birth course, and he'd done some research about birth, and he read the Birth Partner book. And so he was asking lots of questions, being very helpful at that point, actually. And she said, it's different with forceps because there's a much greater risk if there's a tear that it's much worse, and that it could go, all the way to your anus or forward to your urethra. And so having an episiotomy, which can go to the side, is much easier to heal than if it's a large tear. So I consented to that. And so she applied the forceps, and it was wild to me how hard it seemed she was pulling. She was a pretty small person, but she had, she was gripping these forceps with both her hands and just almost leaning back, just pulling hard. And I was pushing at the same time. And it just took one contraction, and she said, "Whoa, stop pushing." And she did cut an episiotomy. And then out came baby just right away. And they lifted him up onto my chest, and I saw right away as a boy. They laid him on my chest. I had this hospital gown on, which was I had kind of pulled it all the way up to my neck to get it out of the way so that he could be on my chest, on my skin. And it was, I had my baby on my chest. It was such a unexpected environment, but the moment was still, so precious, what I'd been waiting for and working for. And my husband, Carl, after a minute or so, he was right by my side, and he said, is it a boy or a girl? And I was so surprised to hear that, because I just kind of had seen right away, and I thought, oh, everybody knows who this baby is already. And I said, oh, it's a boy, and Aww. So that was a sweet moment that we got to share.
Yeah.
In the operative report that I read afterwards, it says that he was on my chest for 10 minutes, but it felt like seconds. I felt like, I was super surprised when I read that afterwards because I thought it was maybe a minute. And then I started hemorrhaging and he was having a little bit of grunting. And so there was a doctor who was, in charge of the pediatric care right away. And so she took the baby over to the warmer. And people started like flooding around me. Carl was backed way up. And from his perspective afterwards, he said, he just saw this like pool of blood spreading quickly on the floor, like a puddle. And so I had, I think about 5 different uterotonics. The doctor was just calling out, use this, use this, use this. And they were like, putting them into my leg, one in the IV, and then stabbing me in the leg with all these different uterotonics to try to stem the bleeding. The doctor put her hands internally and applied pressure. I had not delivered the placenta yet. And so it wasn't from the placenta site. It was actually my lower section of my uterus was hemorrhaging. And so she put her hands in and applied manual pressure. And that started to help the blood slow. She had called a massive blood code. And so another doctor had come in and they decided to use a Bacri balloon. So it's a little like balloon that they fill inside and that applies pressure as well to help stem the bleeding. And then after that, she did a manual removal of my placenta. And so like just had it like cleared it all out. And they did like an ultrasound to see if everything was cleared out. During that time, while all that was going on, baby was over on the warmer, kind of, across the room, and Carl was over with him. And I could see him, and he was crying. They put it like a tube down to see if he had fluid in his stomach first, I think. And then, they were just trying to figure out why he was having a little bit of grunting going on. They put him on a little CPAP kind of thing for a little while, but he was crying away. And I just remember so clearly looking over and seeing Carl standing there. And I just said, put your hands on him. And so he kind of said, oh yeah, okay. So he put his hands like onto the baby and just to, give him that comfort of having somebody touching his sick in. Cause I looking over and just seeing him crying there just, broke my heart. Yeah.
Yeah. That's hard.
It was. So then after I think he was in the warmer for about 20 minutes and then he was doing fine. So they said they would transfer him and Carl to the recovery room. And our midwife, Lisa, went with them to get them kind of settled in. They got to have skin-to-skin contact for, I think it was around an hour while I was just getting, through the recovery. So I had the Bacri balloon and then they took that out and the bleeding had slowed. And so they were happy with that. I had a small tear in my vaginal wall and then the episiotomy. So they were sewing up, those. And then, it was interesting. It was just such a different mode of care. And it was such a stark difference to be thrown into at that stage of giving birth. Being at home with we had low lights and candles, and I felt just very held. And my midwife was so wonderful about just asking before, doing any kind of little thing, just, getting consent for everything. And then to be into the hospital where everybody's just kind of doing their job. And it's just, it's a different school of thought. And then, afterward, one thing that really stood out to me was I still couldn't feel anything, of course, because the epidural, and the doctor looked up at me and said, okay, I just did a rectal exam and everything's fine. And it was just very surprising. I was like, oh, you didn't even nobody's telling me what's happening. You didn't, I know I can't feel it, but you didn't ask if you could do that.
Yeah.
And they had just been in this time where it was very, a very emergency situation. So of course they couldn't be asking, can we do all of these different procedures? And so I think she was still in that mode a bit as well. But it's interesting just to note that afterwards, when it is a time where you could be communicating with the person who's laying on the table here and just giving them that respect, I think.
Right. Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So then how about recovery at the hospital? And then we can talk about going home.
Yeah. So I got to join baby and dad in the recovery room, and he latched and nursed a little bit. Our midwife actually had gone home before I was able to join them. She came in to say, she was she had been with us for 24 hours, so she needed to get home and rest, which I totally understood. And we were in the care of the hospital, so that made sense. But thinking about it afterwards, I wish she could have been there for that little first time that I got to have the baby on my chest for a moment, but it would have been really nice to have her continuing care while we had that moment of latching and nursing for the first time. And yeah, so we had that in the recovery room, and then moved to our, got checked in and moved to our room, and saw my sister Robin and my friend Leela, who had been waiting there very anxiously. My sister Robin, who I talked about taking the doula course before, it had been taking such a long time. And then Carl sent them a photo of the baby right after, like about 10 minutes after he was born. So they knew he was okay. And so Robin had said, I bet she's hemorrhaging, because she was thinking, why is it taking so long? So she had that in mind, and they were still waiting for us when we got to the room. I think it was about 1 a.m. at that point, maybe midnight. So they were there to welcome us, and they'd brought bags that I'd packed from our house and got us all set up. The hospital, the labor and delivery ward there, has rooms that have 2 beds in them. And so Carl could sleep in one and I could sleep in one, which was really wonderful. And there was like a little bassinet for the baby beside, which he did sleep in for about an hour, I think, when we got in there. And then after that, he was just tucked in with me, because that's what worked for him and for me. So then, yeah, we stayed in the hospital for about 4 nights. It took a while for my milk to come in. I heard from lots of different people, different healthcare professionals, that when you have a lot of blood loss, it can take longer for your milk to come in. I had expressed some colostrum before our birth, and we got to give that to him. And I was working on hand expressing to feed him, but he was losing weight, and I was also just very I was weak. I got blood transfusions. I got a unit of blood and a unit of plasma, but definitely I felt pretty weak in the few days after the birth. We had wonderful care from our friends and family, like bringing us meals at the hospital, and coming to visit, and also the nursing staff at the hospital were wonderful. So 4 days after he was born, which was on, I think, the 29th of November, our midwife decided to discharge us. At that point, Dimitri was actually down, had lost 10% of his birth weight. But my milk had come in then. I had started taking fenugreek and blessed thistle supplement, like a whole bunch of it. You see, like, when you take it for increasing milk supply, it's like, I think I was taking 4 pills 6 times a day or something, like through around the clock. And maybe that helped, and maybe it was also just time. But I had my milk supply came in, and so even though he was down 10% of his birth weight, our midwife thought like he'll be okay to go home now that he's latching well and able to get the milk. So we headed home. We actually stopped. Our first stop leaving the hospital was a chiropractor, because baby had been having issue with being held on one side. Like if I nursed him on one side, that was okay. On the other side, I'd use the football hold, so he's always on the same side, because holding him facing the other direction down, he would be like very uncomfortable and having a really hard time latching. And a couple different people had suggested that, with the forceps delivery, and then also with such a long pushing phase where I was, pushing and his head was turned sideways and getting pushed for such a long time that way, that he could have some pain. And so we stopped at a chiropractor, and she was wonderful. It was really interesting to see. I don't neither me or my husband go to chiropractors regularly. I've been a couple times throughout my life, but it's not part of our regular care. But just, she worked so gently with him, and it did seem to help. He had that appointment when we left the hospital, and then another one a couple weeks later. And right after the first appointment, there was, more comfort in nursing in the other position. So that was great.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's crazy what they can do with like a teeny tiny baby at the chiropractor.
It is. Yeah. So then we got home. Yeah, feeling of coming home. My mom had been staying at our house with our cat. Our dogs I had shipped off before our labor started to our friends who could take care of them, because I knew I didn't want them to be around during the birth, because they're just, too much in the way. And also after, I wanted to, have a week or so of just being able to not walk dogs and just have focus on the baby. So they weren't there, but my mom and our cat were at home, and it was really wonderful to get home. Everything from the birth my mom and my cousin had cleaned everything up, and it was all, warm. And we had a meal train that somebody had set up for us. So somebody was bringing us dinner every day for, I think, 3 weeks after we got home, which was such a huge gift. I so recommend having a meal train if anybody's in a position to set that up for after your birth. It's just such a nice thing to not have to focus on cooking. So that was a really great way that we were supported after his birth. And then our midwife, was with us for 6 weeks after the birth. So she would come. In the beginning it was every couple days, and then every week, and then every 2 weeks, and so we were continued to be supported at home from her. Overall, I'm glad that I had the experience of laboring at home, even though our birth didn't end up being at home, because it was a wonderful experience. And that's something I take away from it. Even though I did transfer to the hospital and have my baby there, I still got to have that labor at home. And that was a really special experience to be supported in that. And then, just afterwards coming home to our community, feeling that same support, but with my birth team, and then my family and friends, and then our wider community. We really are fortunate that we have that around us. And I think it made our postpartum much easier because we weren't doing it on our own, I felt like. So that was great.
Yeah, I feel like even with a hospital transfer, the continuity of care with postpartum with your midwife is so great, and healing for processing what had happened and everything like that.
Yes, absolutely. It was. And 2 days after we got home, our midwife came to visit, and we named our baby Dimitri after, I think, 3 days. It took us a while. But anyway, the one of the night nurses in the hospital was the first person who we told his name to, because she was just a wonderful nurse who we really liked. And it was the middle of the night, but night and day didn't matter really at that point. And we just decided on his name, and she came in to check on us. And so we said, we've given him a name, and told her his name. So she was the first person who knew his name. Anyway, I was going to say 2 days after we came home, Lisa, our midwife, came to visit and weighed Dimitri, and he had been gaining 50 grams a day since we gotten home. So the first 2 days he gained 50 grams, he'd gained 100 grams since we'd been home. So that was amazing. It was like, okay, we're on the right track.
Good eater.
Yeah, it was great.
All right. Well, I feel like you've mentioned some really good resources already, but any you want to kind of highlight at the end here?
So I really enjoyed listening to this podcast throughout my pregnancy. That we did do the Know Your Options birth course as well, which both my husband and I really enjoyed, and got a lot of good information from. My sister Robin, who I've talked about lots, gave us 2 books right when, actually even before we were pregnant. I told her we're gonna plan to have a baby, and she gave us Ina May's Guide to Childbirth and The Birth Partner, and I read Ina May's guide, and we together read The Birth Partner, and those were both really great books. And then Pelvic Floor Physio, I totally just recommend that. I said that earlier, but I think it's such a great thing that I think is becoming more known and talked about. But wow, it made a huge difference for me, in preparation for birth and in my recovery afterwards. Even with the episiotomy, I didn't see the pelvic floor physio, I think, for 6 weeks after birth. But then just in that recovery, it helped so much to get specific exercises for my body that helped, and also to learn how to massage the scar. Just such a wealth of knowledge, and so helpful in recovery and preparation. Beyond that, I think for me, just having a community is such a huge thing. I was really lucky to have the group that I mentioned earlier called Growing with Baby. That kind of group is not available to everybody, but I've heard recently about an app, which I don't even know the name of, but I'm sure if anybody's interested, they can find it, where you, it's like something about moms, and you put in the information about when your baby's due or how old your children are, and you can get connected with other moms in your area who share interests, or just have children or are expecting at the same time. And so, that's another way that I've heard of people building kind of that community of people who are going through the same experience, which I think is so valuable in pregnancy and birth and postpartum.
Yeah. I feel like especially in those early years, you might not have a lot in common otherwise, but when you can talk about sleep stuff and diapers and feeding, there's just immediately so much in common because you're both going through it. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. And where can people reach out to connect with you?
I am on Instagram at true.yara. So it's true.yara. And that's my dog's names. I don't post a lot on there, but if people reach out to me on there, send me a message, I would absolutely be interested. I'm totally curious about, I should have said this earlier maybe, but I'm so curious to hear about other people's experiences, if other people have had experiences about contractions slowing after you've already been pushing. That's something that I'm curious to hear other people's experiences about. I've only talked to one other person who had that experience, and they ended up having a cesarean birth. And yeah, I'm just, because I had the experience and it wasn't something that I had thought of. It wasn't a potential possibility that I had foreseen. And so I'm very curious to hear other people's experiences with that.
Yeah. Well, I guarantee someone will reach out to you about it because I hear from guests a lot that they get messages. So thanks for offering your info, and thank you again for sharing.
Thanks so much, Bryn.
All right. Now I'm going to chat with Jackie from Motif Medical all about their new wearable pump. Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining me to chat about the Motif breast pump line.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited. We have some exciting things coming.
Awesome. Well, before we get into all of that, will you tell listeners just a little bit about you and what you do at Motif Medical?
Yes, so I am a registered nurse and board certified lactation consultant, and I have the pleasure of being the clinical lactation advisor or clinical lactation specialist with Motif, which just means I get to play around with all the fun breast pumps and tell them all the things that might make the pumps and the products better for breastfeeding families, and I absolutely love it. I also work in private practice, so I still and very much, boots on the ground, helping families in their own homes right after birth or anytime in the postpartum period and the prenatal period, just helping families be more prepared for a breastfeeding journey and all the things that they might encounter.
Very cool. Well, I was lucky enough to get to use the Luna breast pump when it was pretty new. I guess 6 years ago now. My youngest just turned 6. And I talk about all the time how it was my favorite pump of all the ones I had tried, over 3 kids and everything. And then you guys came out with the hands-free pump a couple years ago. And now there's something new on the horizon. So I want to talk about the new pump that's coming out this year.
Yes, we are very excited. Just after the first of the year, we are launching the Aura Glow, which is a new wearable pump. You might remember the Aura as our original wearable pump, and it's still available, but we've got a new player on deck that I think is going to provide a lot of really sought after features, a lot of great pump quality, and something that moms I think are going to be really excited to use on a pretty regular basis as they're going back to work or just going about their lives where they need to be hands-free, need to have that wearable pump option.
Very cool. So I know you guys kind of take a lot of, I don't know, advice isn't the right word, but you take feedback. There we go. You take feedback from customers and what people are liking about pumps and things like that. So what are some of the differences with the Aura Glow that we can expect to see?
Yes, I love this question because this is why I love working with Motif, that they are so particular about taking feedback from the professional community, from the families who are using their products, and they're not just looking to pump out products that, sell. Obviously, it's a business. We need to sell things to stay in business, but the idea is to make products that actually meet needs and make pumping easier for people so that they naturally just want to buy the products, which I love that idea. And I love that we've built the Aura Glow based on feedback. So the thing I'm most excited about is the expanded flange sizing. So you get 5 flange sizes right in the box. So you get the 24 millimeter breast shield, but we also include 15 millimeter, 17 millimeter, 19 millimeter, and 21 millimeter inserts so that right out of the box, most people are going to be able to find something that allows them to pump efficiently, effectively, and comfortably. And then if those sizes don't work, the 15 through 24 that come in the box don't work, we also have even smaller sizes, 11, 12, 13, and 14 millimeter inserts available, and then a 27 millimeter breast shield available for those that might need a larger size. So excited about that. The other things that I think set this pump apart, it's a powerful wearable. So the suction is 260 to 280 mmHg. So that's millimeters of mercury. That's how we measure that suction pressure. And that puts it on par with the suction of pumps like Luna. It's still a wearable, still something that we're going to classify as a secondary pump that we would use to complement the Luna, but it's powerful. And it has 2 pre-programmed pumping modes, which are just, I think, something that's going to make life so much easier and take a lot of the guesswork out of, what settings do I use? How do I set my pump to get the most out of it?
Yeah, the different sizing is huge. I know I tried a wearable pump with my last baby, and it was, it was very early on in the making of these, but it just that did not work for me and was not comfortable. So having those different sizes is amazing. And do you guys provide some kind of guidance in, the packaging, or can people reach out to help find the right size?
We do provide guidance in the packaging. That's all been updated to
Mm.
match the most current information we have about flange sizing. So, as I said, Motif is huge on listening to that feedback, and lactation consultants have been screaming about flange sizing for a while now. And Motif definitely has listened by including those smaller sizes and that flange sizing guidance that does fit the most current information that we have about getting the right size.
Amazing. So you also mentioned the programming modes for pumping. Can you explain a little bit about those and what's different with the Aura Glow?
Yes. So I think this is revolutionary. I love this idea. There are 2 pre programmed pumping sessions. There is the cluster feeding mode and the general pumping mode. And you can still use the pump, just as you normally would use a breast pump. But the cluster feeding mode has these 5 levels of pumping and then pause, pumping and pause to mimic how a baby cluster feeds. So that can help increase milk supply. And
Mm.
without the need to do this like big long power pumping, hour-long power pumping session. It's this 30-minute pre-programmed session that your pump will move through all by itself. And then the general pumping mode is just a way to maximize your pumping efforts a little bit by triggering a couple of letdowns. So it goes through massage mode and it stays there for 2 minutes to help trigger that letdown. Then it goes to expression mode and you get that, longer, more rhythmic, kind of mimicking how the baby suckles once your milk has let down. And then it will go back to the massage mode automatically to trigger that second letdown and then go back to expression. So it repeats the massage, expression, without you even having to think about it. And that way you can get a little bit more out of the time you're spending pumping.
Yeah, that's amazing. I don't think I've heard of that before on a pump. And I'm just like sitting here, like picturing a nursing session with baby, and like they kind of fall asleep. And then they're like, oh, wait, I want some more. And they wake up, and then you have another letdown. And I could see that being something that you would really benefit from as far as milk supply with a pump that could do that as well.
Yes, exactly. Just trying to take advantage of all those hormone fluctuations and all the ways that our babies know exactly how to influence our milk supply. We're just trying to mimic that with the pump setting.
Awesome. Okay, so then you mentioned that, you do classify it as a secondary pump. What kind of guidance would you give people that are trying to decide, what pump is right for them, based on whether they're pumping full time or using it occasionally, or, lifestyle, things like that? Do you, especially in your work in private practice, I'm sure you see a lot of people wondering what they should get.
Oh, yes. I get this question a lot. And the truth is, when we do anything other than traditional flanges and that high quality double electric pump, like the Motif Luna, anything that doesn't have those traditional flanges and that powerful motor is really considered a secondary pump. Now, does that mean it's not going to work or it's not going to be effective? It's not going to have its place? Of course not. We know lots of people are using wearable and portable pumps, and many of them, are very successful at building and maintaining milk supply. But for most people, we want to rely on something that's a primary pump like the Luna to build and maintain a milk supply, and then use something like a wearable or portable pump. So a wearable like the Aura Glow as that secondary option that we're using when we just can't drag out the big pump and the traditional flanges. So I have 4 kids. I could very easily see myself needing a wearable pump to be able to keep up with my other children if I were to have another baby. And that would be a perfect scenario to use this pump, at those times when you just need to be hands-free. Maybe you're traveling, maybe you're at work, lots of different scenarios. And what I tell people is, if you're in a situation where you can't pull out that primary pump, then this would be a perfect option. A wearable like the Aura Glow would be a perfect option to complement for those times when you can't pull out your primary pump. And I do have lots of patients who kind of incorporate them from the beginning when they first introduce pumping. We tend to get a better result than if we only use one type of pump and then try to add another pump later. Sometimes it's about getting your body to be sort of conditioned to respond. So maybe adding in that wearable, if you know you're going to need it, adding it in when you first start introducing pumping into your journey.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I could see it being something that, keeps people nursing their baby just because they may not have pumped otherwise. Like you were saying, you get into a situation where you can't pull out that pump. So you just push off that pumping session, which I know I did with my second baby at work. And then my milk supply suffered. But maybe if I had had something like this, I would have been like, oh, let me just do this real quick while I finish this work or whatever. And I always tell people, block it on your calendar. Like, don't make exceptions. Don't miss a pumping session. But of course, things come up and it can be hard sometimes. So I love that there's just more options out there.
Yes, some milk removal is always better than no milk removal. So it's like, if we can only pump with a wearable, then by golly, let's get that wearable out. That's exactly what we need to do in that scenario. So yeah I love that encouragement that it might make things actually make that breastfeeding journey go a little bit further with the help of the tools that we have now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I love, I've loved everything that Motif has come out with. So I'm so excited for this new launch and to hear everyone's feedback from it. And I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me today about the new Aura Glow.
Yes, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you again to Margaret for sharing her story. If you want to find her show notes page, head over to thebirthhour.com and just search for her name in the search bar, and that'll come up for you. And of course, if you want to join the Know Your Options course or our Patreon group, those links are in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode, as well as at thebirthhour.com. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.